little bit about myself. Paul Tortland. I'm a practicing physician here in Glastonbury. I've been practicing for 30 years, specializing in sports medicine and non-surgical orthopedics. A little bit of self-promotion. I was the first doctor in New England and one of the first in the country to actually start doing stem cell treatments for orthopedic conditions, rotator cuff tears, arthritis. I speak around the country. Actually, I'll be speaking in Italy in September at an international stem cell meeting. All of that and $2 gets me a cup of coffee at Cumberland Farms. More importantly, I've been walking with the Lord since 1981. After I graduated from college at UConn, had some changes in my life, and I grew up, I'm Italian Catholic. I grew up with a church background, but never knew what it meant to have a personal relationship with Jesus. After I graduated from college, that's when I got involved with the Navigators and learned about having a personal relationship with Christ, and have been walking with him ever since then. So I'm married. My wonderful wife, Allison, is here. We have 3 awesome kids. And so that's a bit of my background. Let me give you some sobering information to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about this morning. And if you're having trouble seeing some of my slides, there's plenty of room up front. Don't hesitate. I don't spit and I don't bite, okay? So here's some sobering statistics, okay? Only 20% of students who are highly churched as teens remain spiritually active by the age of 29. That is sobering. A more recent study by Lifeway Group in 2017 found that 2/3 of teenagers walk away from their faith. While 30% of them return, that still leaves a dropout rate of almost 50%. 59% of children, college freshmen, who identify themselves as born again, no longer identify themselves that way at the age 4 years later, according to a UCLA study. Stunning, sobering. "18 to 29-year-olds disproportionately represent the unchurched, what are known as the nuns. The nuns are those who are unaffiliated, the agnostics, the atheists, and so on. 2/3 of Americans believe that scientists have created simple life in the laboratory. 1/3 of Americans believe that scientists have created a complex life form, such as a frog. Spoiler alert, friends, neither of those are true, okay? The question is, why the fallout? Why do we have such a dropout among our teenagers when they go to school? Why are so many Americans believing things that just aren't true? Well, one reason is, at least among our kids, is the perception, and adults as well, that science has eliminated the need for God. We are constantly being inundated by scientists and by the media that the more we learn about science, the less that we need God. And that gets hammered over and over and over as they go throughout their entire school curriculum, from grade school all the way into postgraduate. Okay. Also, once you get into college, you are bombarded by liberal professors, indoctrination. It's really hard when you're an impressionable teenager, a freshman in college, to fight against the power of the professors. And you've got the peer pressure. We also have a liberal media that is constantly bombarding us with anti-Christian messages. It's really, really hard to fight against those. We also have, and I think the church has done a really poor job in general, not this church, but the church in general has done a poor job of adequately preparing our children and adults also in spiritual grounding to combat this. We're not trained intellectually to deal with these issues when they arise. And these are important life-altering issues as they occur, okay? For many, faith is seen as subjective. 54% of Americans see theology, see faith as a kind of make-your-own-adventure book. Okay, they don't see it as objective truth. They see it as subjective, not objective. And then there's a lack of Bible knowledge. If you don't know what's in the Word, how can you combat what's out there? When a liberal professor says to a student, well, the Bible is full of contradictions and full of errancies, you can't trust that. If you don't know what the Bible actually says, how can you combat that? Okay, that's what you're faced with. Many students and many adults have an inaccurate view of Christianity. You know, let's face it, many people have been hurt by the church. They've been hurt by people in the church. And as a result, they develop a view of God and Christianity that is not a biblical view. Many students going into college see God as kind of a cosmic bellhop who we call on when we need him to do our bidding. You see that in the health and wealth gospel. The reason you're not successful is you don't have enough faith, which is putting the burden on you. That's not a biblical worldview. Kids see God as an ogre, a cosmic policeman who's telling us you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have fun. That's not a biblical view of God. That's not a biblical view of Christ. But if you don't know what the biblical view is, how can you counter that view when it's presented to you? My talk this morning is called Design to the Core. Are faith and science compatible? And what we're going to look at specifically are three things. We're going to look at comparing science and faith. We're going to look at some scientific examples of God's handiwork, and we're going to go into some practical applications. The key verse for this morning is 1 Peter 3:15. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. That's not a suggestion, friends. That's a command that we are to be ready to make a defense, to fight for that hope that's within us. But if you're not prepared to make that defense, how are you going to do that? Okay. Are you ready? You ready to rumble? All right, let's have some fun. Let's get ready to rumble, okay? Science versus faith. Let's take a look first at science, okay? What is science? Science, very simply, is a system of knowledge that studies the physical world and its phenomenon in an unbiased manner with observations and experimentation. That's according to Britannica. According to Berkeley, science is a way of discovering what's in the world, how things work now, how they probably worked in the past, and how we can expect them to work in the future. Okay? Science, when we think of science, we tend to think of scientists in a laboratory doing an experiment and see what the outcome of that experiment is. Okay? That's known as inductive science. You set a set of hypotheses, and then you test those hypotheses to see if that actually is what's true. That's what most people think of when they think of science. And that works when you're looking forward and trying to see, what if I do this and this? What's the outcome? But that doesn't work when you're trying to figure out what happened in the past. A coroner cannot go back in time and say, let's re-kill that person and see how they died. Okay? For past things, you have to do what's called abductive reasoning, which means you have to look at all the possible clues. And based on all of those clues and all of that evidence, you formulate a series of hypotheses. And then you have to say, which of these hypotheses makes the most sense? That's what's known as inference to the best explanation. When you have multiple competing hypotheses, how do you decide which hypothesis makes the most sense? It's an inference to the best explanation. And that is tied into a priest. William of Ockham. This is where you get Occam's razor. Very simply put, Occam's razor is, keep it simple, silly. Okay? The simplest explanation is usually the right one. What Occam really said was, don't add more to the argument for the sake of making the argument than is absolutely necessary to make the point. Okay? So when you have multiple competing hypotheses, which hypothesis best explains the information, taking into account Occam's razor, which is the simplest, which makes the most sense. Okay? Let me give you an example. You go outside and your car is wet. Okay? It's got rain on it. And you say, well, why is the car wet? You look around and the driveway is wet. The lawn is wet. The street is wet. The neighbor's yard is wet. Well, you could say it probably rained. That's the most logical explanation. What if you walk outside and the car is wet, the driveway is wet, your yard is wet, but the street is dry and your neighbor's yard is dry? Well, that changes things a little bit. Maybe there was a microburst and it rained just on your property. Or maybe the lawn sprinklers went off. Which one makes the most sense? What if you walk outside and just the car and the driveway around it is wet, but not the yard? Well, was there a micro burst just over your car? Was one of your sprinkler heads faulty and it just watered your car? Or did somebody wash the car? You see, you've got multiple competing hypotheses. Which one is the inference to the best explanation? Okay, that's how we do historical science. Okay. Ideally, science is objective, it is evidence-based, and it is reason-based. Let me share a little secret with you. It's not. Okay? Anytime somebody says to you, friends, the science is settled, your red flags and alarm bells should go off like the robot in, Lost in Space. Danger, Will Robinson, danger. No. Anytime somebody says the science is settled, you should be very, very cautious. Science is never settled. If science was settled, we would still be flat earthers believing that the sun rotated around the earth. Okay? We all suffered terribly through COVID. Okay? We were all imposed on us this 6-foot rule. You know where that 6-foot rule came from? Tony Fauci admitted he made it up. Why? It seemed reasonable. What do you do when you go to the airport? You stand 6 feet apart. What do you do when you get on the plane? You're sitting shoulder to shoulder next to people. Okay. So science is not always objective and evidence-based. So when people say the science is settled, be very, very wary. Okay. What is the difference, though, between science and scientism? And this is where the subjective comes into view. Scientism is a philosophical worldview that only matter and science and energy, that only science can render truth about the world. Once you have that philosophical worldview that science is the only thing that can render truth, you have closed your eyes to all the other possibilities, irrespective of what the data shows. So now when you look at multiple competing hypotheses, you have eliminated a whole bunch of hypotheses because you've said, this is my worldview. This is what I believe. Nothing else matters. Well, you just close yourself off to all the other possibilities. Science should be based on where the evidence leads, irrespective of where it leads. But not if you've got a worldview that says this is the only path moving forward, okay? We like to believe that science can give us proof, okay? Spoiler alert. Science can't prove anything. Does anybody know the one discipline where there is absolute proof? Mathematics. Exactly. Only in mathematics can you have 100% proof. Every other discipline, you can't prove anything. You can make an inference to the best explanation, but you can't prove it. Allison and I have been married 37 years. I can't prove that she loves me. I can't. The fact that I'm standing here and still breathing is proof that she loves me in spite of everything that I've put her through over the years. But can I prove that? No. In September, I'm flying to Italy to speak at a stem cell conference. Can I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm going to get to Italy safely? No, of course not. My uniform and repeated experience says that in all likelihood, I'm going to get there. Okay. But science can't prove anything. Any lawyers here by any chance? Okay. No. In a court of law, what is the standard for the burden of proof? It is beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not beyond any shadow of doubt, right? So that's the standard that we use in science, okay? Now let's take a look at faith, okay? We'll contrast faith. Christians are often accused of having blind faith, okay? I'm not talking about the super group Blind Faith. Great group, by the way. Eric Clapton and Stevie Winwood and Ginger Baker. Great group. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about blind faith, where we have faith with no evidence to back it up. That's what Christians are accused of. What I hope to show you today is our faith, folks, is not based on blindness. Our faith is based on evidence, okay? Let's talk about faith. What is faith? Faith is confidence in a person, thing, or concept. In fact, the word faith comes from the Latin word fides. Fides means trust, loyalty. It means a steadfastness, a promise or commitment. Those of you who are into stereos, fidelity is where that comes from. High fidelity means you are trying to accurately reproduce the sound of those instruments through your stereo speakers. That's where faith comes from. It's confidence in an accurate representation of something. That's faith. Here's a dirty little secret. Even atheists have faith. They may not have faith in a God, but you have to have faith as a scientist, because if you don't have faith that the universe is intelligible and discoverable and predictable, you can't do science. Every time an atheist turns on that car, he or she is taking an act of faith, trusting that that car is going to work based on uniform and repeated experience. Okay? So the next time an atheist says, I don't believe in faith, say, you have faith every day. Okay? It's just not the same as a religious faith. The problem is that science and faith address two different questions. They are two different categories. When you see the teapot boiling, I can ask you, why is the water in the teapot boiling? And a scientist will say, well, the heat is increasing the kinetic energy of the molecules. And as the kinetic energy increases, the molecules move faster. And then the water boils. Yes, that is a chemical explanation for why the water is boiling. And it's absolutely correct. I could also ask you, why is the water boiling? And you could say, because I want a cup of tea. Okay? They're the same correct answers, but they're addressing two different things. Faith and science are not contradictory. They're addressing two different questions. The late Lord Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi in the United Kingdom, said science takes things apart to see how they work. Faith puts them together to see what they mean. Okay. Something happened in the 15th and 16th century that revolutionized the world, and that was the scientific revolution. Okay. During the scientific revolution, there was a groundswell of change in how people looked at the world. They started to look at objective things. How does this work rather than why? They looked for reasons. The scientific method was born out of the scientific revolution. Okay. It was a dramatic change in world culture and set the stage for what we now have as modern science. The big question is, why there and why then? Why in Western Europe during the 15th and 16th century did the scientific revolution occur? Why was there that sudden change then? There were other really advanced cultures in the world. The Egyptians built pyramids, phenomenal feats of engineering. The Romans built roads and aqueducts that are still standing. The Chinese invented gunpowder and pasta. Okay. Okay. Right. I'm Italian. Okay. Why there in Western Europe at that particular time? The answer is actually quite simple, and all historians agree on this. Protestant Reformation. Who are the fathers of modern science? Isaac Newton, Johann Kepler, Boyle. Isaac Newton deduced the laws of gravitational motion. Kepler described the laws of planetary motion. Newton invented the calculus. Boyle, anybody here take chemistry? Okay, yeah, some of you have taken chemistry. You all know the formula, PV equals nRT, the ideal gas law. That was Robert Boyle. Okay, then you have Maxwell, who discovered electromagnetism, Galileo. These were all incredible men of faith who saw no conflict between science and faith. Quite the opposite. They saw their faith as being a way of understanding what God had made and then sharing it with other people. Do you know that Isaac Newton wrote 1.3 million words on theology? He wrote more on theology than he did on all of his scientific works combined. When he discovered the law of gravity, he didn't say, well, now I discovered the law of gravity, I guess I don't need God anymore. He said, no, what a magnificent God who designed it this way. This is the foundation of modern science. This is what gave rise to where we are today. Okay? As Boyle said, it's the job of the scientist not to ask what God must have done, but to go out and see how he actually did it. That's the job of the scientist. The early fathers, scientific fathers, believed in a rational God who created a rational, ordered, and intelligible universe. As C.S. Lewis said, men became scientific because they expected to find law in nature. And they expected to find law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. Okay, powerful. But no good deed goes unpunished, does it? So along comes the rise of methodical materialism. Materialism is the belief that matter and energy are all that exist and all that ever existed and all that ever will exist. It was really born out of Darwin's theory of evolution, and they regard organized religion not only as the direct, but also an existential threat to the advancement of science. That is what we're facing with today. The father of this is John Draper, who was a physician. He actually wrote a book in the 1800s titled The History of the Conflict Between Faith and Science. What conflict? Faith gave rise to science. He invented the conflict. He actually wrote this quote. He said, "Religion and science are absolutely incompatible. They cannot exist together. Mankind must choose one over the other, cannot have both." Why not? But this has become the dominant thinking in science today. Okay? As Paul wrote in Romans, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, having been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." That's the foundation. Okay. What I want to do now is briefly look at three areas of science that show God's handiwork. Okay. The first area is cosmology. No, this is not cosmetology. I'm not going to teach you how to put eyeliner on. Cosmology is a branch of astrophysics that has to do with the origin of the universe. Okay. Let's take a look at some facts here. Our universe currently is 13.8 billion years old. Okay. It is 90 billion light years across. Right now, the known universe is 90 billion light years. It's really hard to wrap your head around that. A light year is how far light will travel in 1 year. Know how far that is? 5.9 trillion miles. In 1 year, light will travel almost 6 trillion miles. So the extent of our known universe is 6 trillion times 90 billion. So that's 540 billion trillion miles across our known universe, okay? It's estimated that there are 2 trillion galaxies. When you look up in the sky, other than Venus and maybe Saturn, all those white dots that you see, those are actually galaxies, okay? It's estimated that there are 2 trillion galaxies. Our Earth is currently accepted about 4 billion years old, okay? And humans have been on Earth somewhere between 40,000 and 100,000 years. Right off the bat, you can probably guess I'm not a young Earth creationist, and I do not believe that the first 7 days of Genesis represent a literal 7 days. If you ever invite me back, I'd be happy to do a sermon on the first 7 days of Genesis from a science perspective and explain why I do not believe that those are literal 7 days. By the way, that's one of the biggest arguments that atheists make against Christianity, that you cannot be scientific if you believe that Genesis 1 represents a literal 7 days. Okay. Another sermon for another day. Okay. Well, what is some of the evidence for this? Okay. The Big Bang. Okay. Prior to the 1920s, it was believed that the universe was self-existent and eternal. Well, in the 1920s, along comes a Belgian priest, man of faith, Georges Lemaitre. And he said, I think there was a primeval atom, and that primeval atom exploded, and the radiation from that is what created the universe and all the galaxies. Well, a few years later, an astrophysicist in Britain had a popular radio program, Fred Hoyle. And forgive me a moment here. Fred Hoyle had a popular radio program trying to popularize science. And he contrasted the steady state view of the universe with Lemaitre's primeval atom. And he ridiculed the primeval atom, and he called it the Big Bang. It was a pejorative term meant to cast aspersions on this idea of a singularity. Why? Because for people like Fred Hoyle, the idea that the universe had a sudden origin was unacceptable both on scientific and philosophical basis. Why? If the universe had an origin, what does that mean? There had to be an originator. And the theistic implications of that were unfathomable for scientists. In fact, Einstein chafed at that idea, and he developed his own steady state model of the universe until something very interesting happened. Hubble came along, okay? Edwin Hubble, excuse me. Everybody heard of the Hubble Space Telescope? Okay. Well, Hubble was actually an attorney who became an astronomer. And looking through a powerful telescope in California, he started to notice something called the red shift. What's the red shift? How many people have seen this? It's the famous album cover from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, okay? Well, it's an accurate representation. When you pass light through a prism, the light will refract into the colors of the spectrum. The light on the violet side has very, very short wavelengths, ultraviolet. The light on the red side is very long, infrared. Now, what happens is objects emit light. As an object moves towards you, the light waves get compressed and get shorter and shorter and shorter. In other words, the light moves towards the ultraviolet side. As an object moves away from you, the light gets stretched out. It moves more towards the red side. Same thing happens with sound, by the way. If you're standing on the side of the road and you see a motorcycle coming down, what happens? It goes, why does that happen? As the motorcycle approaches you, the sound waves get compressed, they get shorter, the pitch goes up. As the motorcycle moves away from you, the sound waves get stretched out and they get elongated. It's like a spring. You compress a spring, the coils get tighter. You stretch out the spring, the coils get farther apart. The red shift was observed in all the universe, which means things are moving away because the light is getting stretched out more and more and more. And no matter where Hubble looked, the entire universe, things were moving away. Well, what does that mean? If something's moving away, that must have mean it had to start some point. So they were able to redict back to a beginning and say, there had to be a beginning, because if something's expanding, it expanded from something. If it was steady state, there would be no expansion. Are you following me on this? Okay. So the Big Bang came along, Hubble found out about the red shift. Something else came along, which really cemented the Big Bang idea. And this was known as the cosmic background radiation. A couple of scientists working in Bell Labs in Virginia constantly heard this background hiss between radio stations. And they said, this sounds like, it seems like, and they postulated that it was persistent radiation left over from the heat of the Big Bang. Well, in 1999, NASA sent up a satellite called the COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer. And that satellite proved the existence of the cosmic background radiation, which had the exact radiation properties that would have been predicted by the Big Bang. In fact, one astronomer, Neil Coman, said it is because of the cosmic background radiation that the Big Bang is now widely accepted as the default cosmological theory. The more we learn about science, the more it's pointing in one direction. Okay? Now, science can't prove the existence of God. I'm not saying that, but it's positing an explanation. Okay? Another aspect of cosmology known as the fine-tuning argument. Okay? David and I were talking about this earlier. There are about 200 parameters in our known universe that are so exquisitely tuned to support life that if any one of those parameters varied by even the minutest amount, either the universe would not have come into being or life would not be supported on Earth. Let's just look at two of those examples, okay? One of those examples is what's known as the gravitational force constant. This is the force of gravity, okay? The amount of attraction. If gravity was too weak, there wouldn't be enough gravity for planets to form. If gravity was too strong, everything would implode on itself and we would have no universe. What's the gravitational force constant? 1 in 10 to the 60th. That's a 1 with 60 zeros after it. Let me help you wrap your head around this, okay? 1 trillion is 1 with 12 zeros after it. 1 times 10 to the 60th is 1 with 60 zeros after it. If you change the gravitational force constant by 1 part in 10 to the 60th, life doesn't exist. That's how fine-tuned our universe is. There's another one. There's the cosmological constant. The cosmological constant is describing how fast the universe is expanding. And it's a balance between the attractive forces and the repulsive forces. If there's too much attraction, the universe collapses on itself. If there's not enough attraction, the universe expands too rapidly for galaxies to form. Okay. That cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 90th. That's how fine. It's almost as if somebody designed this universe specifically for us. And what's amazing is the extent to which people will go to come up with explanations for why the universe exists. One of the most brilliant minds that ever existed, Stephen Hawking, said this, late Stephen Hawking. He actually said this: because there is such a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Friends, this is a good explanation for why scientists often make poor philosophers, okay? This statement in and of itself is self-contradictory. First of all, can something emerge from nothing? Can nothing create something? Absolutely not. The second problem with this is, what does a law of gravity do? What do any of the laws of nature do? They simply are mathematical explanations of how things behave. If I take my Bible and I drop it on the floor, gravity did not cause that to happen. Gravity explains how it happens, but the law is simply a mathematical explanation of the relationship between my Bible and the floor. So laws can't do anything. They simply explain what is. So a law can't bring something into existence. In addition, the law of gravity describes what happens between two bodies. How can you have a law of gravity if there aren't two bodies? You see the inherent contradictions in the statement? But nobody on the Christian side of things starts thinking about things this way. You can't posit a materialistic explanation for the origin of the universe when there was no matter or energy to start with. And it's amazing the degree that atheists will go to come up with explanations. Like one of the most popular things right now is the multiverse. We just happen to be in a lucky universe out of an eternal number of universes that just had the right constitution. All right, well, first of all, nobody's been able to prove the existence of the other universes, but where do the other universes come from? Okay, it just kicks the can farther down the road. You see where I'm going with this? Okay. In order for the universe to have it come into existence, the exister, the creator, had to be immaterial, timeless, infinitely powerful, and personal, because only a personal being can act with purpose. Molecules don't have purpose. They just are. Only a personal, rational being can move with purpose, okay? Enough of cosmology. Let's move into one of my favorite subjects, organic chemistry, okay? Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with this. This is some really cool stuff, okay? We're going to look at two of the basic building blocks. There are 4 basic building blocks of life: amino acids, sugars, lipids, and nucleotides. For the sake of time, I'm just going to look at these first 2, okay? What are amino acids? Amino acids are the substances that make up proteins. They are linked together like beads on a chain, and then that chain folds into a 3-dimensional structure, and that's how proteins are made. Proteins are everything that's important to life. Proteins build muscle, they build structure, but they also act as signaling molecules. They transmit information, okay? The human body is made up of 20 amino acids, okay? Here's what's really interesting, and we're talking about design of the universe. All of the amino acids exist in 2 forms: a left-hand form and a right-hand form. They're mirror images of each other. Just like you have a right hand that can't fit into a left-hand glove, you have a left hand that can't fit into a right-hand glove. We have amino acids that exist in nature in both left and right-handed forms. Here's what's really cool. All of the amino acids in the human body only exist in the left-handed form. How did prebiotic Earth, before there was any life, know to choose just the left-handed forms? It had both available. Remember, molecules don't have purpose. How did prebiotic Earth know to choose just the left-handed forms over the right-handed forms? In addition, look at all these tentacles. Amino acids can hook together in any number of ways, but there's only one right way that they will work. How did prebiotic Earth know how to do that? For scientists to link amino acids together to make a protein, they have to go through elaborate pains to block all the other places where they can attach, so it only attaches in the right place. Prebiotic Earth didn't have that ability, okay? Let's look at sugars very briefly. In the same way that amino acids have a left and right-hand form, sugars have a left and right-hand form, okay? One of the most important sugars is ribose. You've heard of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. So ribose is a critical sugar. All the sugars in nature exist in left and right-hand forms. In the body, all of the sugars exist only in the right-hand form. How did prebiotic Earth know how to choose just the right-hand form of the sugars and the left-hand form only of the amino acids? Also, you look at all those tentacles and those sugars can hook any number of ways. Only one way is the right way for it to work. How did prebiotic Earth know how to do that, folks? It didn't, okay? Here's the bottom line. Of the four major building blocks, amino acids, lipids, sugars, nucleic acids, scientists have not been able to recreate even the basic building blocks of the building blocks in the laboratory in a prebiotically meaningful way. That means without human intervention. They have not been able to do it. And the more we learn about the cell and the complexity, the farther away that goal gets, okay? And yet we are led to believe that somehow these random molecules came together and somehow formed that out of some primordial soup. It violates everything we know about synthetic organic chemistry. Nobody's been able to recreate it. They can't even make a simple sugar in the lab, never mind a cell. And yet we're taught that we've created life. I don't think so. That would be like me saying to you, assemble this without instructions. Okay? Actually, I'm going to go one step further. Okay? I'm going to give you the raw materials. Take the raw materials and build the parts, then assemble them, all without instruction. That's how life came to be. And we're expected to believe that that all happened by random interactions of chemistry? I don't think so. Okay? Let's talk about biology. And we're going to look at two aspects of biology, evolution and information. Okay? Thanks to Darwin, atheists had a field day because Darwin finally gave them an explanation. In fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous living atheists, said, Darwin finally made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Okay? Darwin's principle was that through random selection of genetic material, we would get differentiation of species, that those organisms that were more predisposed to survive in that environment would live, and they would pass that genetic material on. And over a period of millions and millions of years, eventually you would have new species would give rise to new families and new classes and new orders and new phyla, and you'd end up with the tree, okay? I'm going to be a real heretic here, folks. Darwin is dead, okay? And I'm going to show you why. Okay. Right now, in the scientific literature, there are over 100 scientific papers in the peer-reviewed literature questioning the mechanism of Darwinian evolution. Okay. But we're told, wait a second, doesn't the fossil record prove beyond a shadow of a doubt? It's irrefutable. The fossil record proves it. Boom. Case closed. Mic drop. Okay. If you follow the fossil record, this is what Darwinian evolution should look like. You should see species, and species should give rise to higher and higher orders of beings, okay? In other words, it should look like Darwin's tree, okay? We start from a common ancestor, everything branches out from that, okay? Is that what the fossil record shows? No. Fossil record shows the exact opposite. What you see throughout the history of the Earth, the fossil record shows sudden appearance of brand new life forms, brand new body parts with no intermediaries between these life forms. And those brand new life forms give rise to new species. The fossil record, folks, shows the exact opposite of what Darwin predicted. The exact opposite, okay? One of the most famous of these is what's known as the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion occurred back around 530 million years ago, over a period of about 5 to 10 million years. It was the most dramatic, sudden appearance of brand new life forms ever known. You had life forms that never existed, no predetermined intermediaries, nothing that came afterwards, life forms that never existed. And these were found in Western Canada, United States, China, all over the world. But the Cambrian explosion was known to Darwin. In fact, Darwin said, the present case, meaning the Cambrian explosion, can be urged as a valid argument against my theory. He was aware of it. His answer was, we just need enough time to find the intermediaries. Guess what? We've had almost 200 years. There are no intermediaries. And any explanation to explain the absence of the intermediaries are shot full with holes in the arguments. Okay. But the Cambrian explosion is not the only example. There are at least 15 other examples where there's been sudden appearance of life with no pre-intermediates. Insects, flowering plants, butterflies, birds, mammals, all suddenly appeared in the fossil record with no transitional elements. Folks, that's what the fossil record shows, not what you're being taught in school, okay? We are taught that whales evolved over a period of 11 million years from land mammals, right? That's what we're taught. Land mammals over a period of time underwent genetic change and became whales over 11 million years. For a land mammal to become a whale, it takes a change in 20,000 unique characteristics. 20,000. Let's look at one characteristic, the tail fluke. For a land mammal to develop a tail fluke, it's required only 2 gene changes. That's it. 2 genes and you got a fluke. Okay. It's a fluke of nature. Okay. No. Okay. You got a fluke. 2 gene changes. Well, scientists have calculated based on Darwinian evolution, how long it would take for those 2 genes to change to develop a whale fluke. 45 million years. And yet we're told that an entire new species arose in 11 million years. Okay. So we have another problem with evolution. The fossil record is one. The second problem is we got a math problem. There isn't enough time in the history of the Earth for these changes to have taken place. Now, does microevolution occur? Sure. This is what Darwin observed when he saw the different size beaks on the finches, the spotted brown moth in Europe. Okay. Microevolution occurs among species. So a species will develop a woollier coat or a longer beak. So in other words, evolution can help ensure survival of that species, but it doesn't explain the arrival of the species. Are you with me, friends? Okay. Darwin actually was aware of this. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ arose that did not occur by natural random selection over time, my theory would completely fall apart. Sorry, Chuck, your theory has fallen apart. Okay. Naturalistic explanations cannot explain the origin of the eye. It can't explain the origin of things like certain enzyme systems in the body. It can't. The concept of irreducible complexity. Darwin thought the cell was a blob of protoplasm. And so you have to give him a little bit of grace. The more we learn about the cell, the more we learn what's really out there, okay? Put evolution aside, let's look at information in biology, okay? What is the longest known word? Anybody know? The longest known word. Trick question. DNA. DNA is 3.4 billion letters. 3.4 billion letters. Bill Gates said DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than anything we've ever created. Okay. The thing about DNA is it doesn't just contain information, it contains meaningful information with instructions. What's the difference? What am I talking about? Look at the string of letters. The string of letters contains information. You can see that there are unique letters. You can recognize those letters. There's information in that, but it's not meaningful or useful information. But if we rearrange those letters, now we have meaningful information. That's how our DNA is structured. In fact, there's another fascinating aspect about our DNA. Anybody know what a palindrome is? A palindrome is a word that's spelled the same way forward and backward, like radar and kayak. DNA has palindromes. Has anybody ever heard of a heteropalindrome? A heteropalindrome is a word that spells one thing in one direction and a different word in the opposite direction. Diaper and repaid. Same word spelled differently in back. Means 2 different things. That's information compression. You have twice as much information in that same string. That's how our DNA is made. You tell me that happened by chance? Okay, you look at DNA, okay? You've got the phosphoribose backbone, and then you've got the base pairs in between. We're going to talk a little bit about more in this in a second here, okay? Those base pairs are made up of 4 different subunits called nucleotides: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, okay? The structure of the DNA, everybody's seen this picture, the Watson and Crick picture, okay? Where you've got the backbone on the outside and you got the base pairs on the inside, okay? Remember I said sugars were important? They make up the backbone. The base pairs are what link the two backbones together. But the key is it's the arrangement of those pairs that determines the information. It's not the physical structure of the base pairs. It's the arrangement, like letters in a word on a page. It's how those base pairs are arranged that convey the information. Like a string in a computer code, you don't have random appearance. These things are organized in a specific sequence. When you look at a bunch of Scrabble letters, you don't think that the information is based on the wooden block or plastic block. It's not even the letter itself. It's the arrangement of those letters that conveys the information. Same thing with DNA. It's the arrangement of those base pairs that contains the information. Why is that important? Why am I sharing this with you? Because when you have to create new life forms, what do you need? You need new information. If you want your computer to perform a new function, friends, what do you need to do? You need to write new code. Okay? You need new information. Okay. Now, the problem with life is this information is really complex. Let's take a look at a bike lock. A bike lock, very simple. You have 4 cylinders. Each cylinder has 10 numbers on it. That gives you a possible of 10,000 possible combinations. There's only one combination that works. That means 999,000 times you're going to get it wrong. Okay. Let's take a look at a very simple protein. Let's look at the peptide insulin. Insulin's a protein. Okay. It's made up of 51 amino acids. Okay. Each of these amino acids fills one spot. So if you look at the 51 amino acids, and there are 20 amino acids that can go in each one of those spots, what are the possible number of combinations that those amino acids could take up to make insulin? 20 to the 51 power. Okay, what does that look like when spelled out? It looks like this. Only one sequence is correct, folks, and that is for a simple protein of 51 amino acids. Most proteins in the body are 150 to 300 amino acids long. The numbers start to get staggering, okay? The odds of a single protein, follow me with this. It's important that you understand this because you see how magnificent our God is, okay? The odds of a single protein of 150 amino acids forming through the blind interactions of chemistry are 1 in 10 to the 164th power. What are those chances? These are the chances. 1 in 100 million, trillion, 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 trillion chances. That's for one protein of 150 amino acids. How many proteins are there in the body? 10,000. The simplest cell contains 300 proteins. Do you see the combinatorial problem that you have by all of this happening through blind interactions of chemistry? For the sake of time, I'm going to move on here, okay? Information, anytime you see it, whether it's a computer code, whether it's pages in a text, whether it's a fine-tuned engine, whether it's the inscription on the Rosetta Stone, anytime you see information, our uniform and repeated experience always points in one direction: a mind. Information always comes from a mind, okay? Why do scientists then claim that they've been able to create life? You see this all the time. Here's the dirty secret. They lie and they cheat. Scientists back in the 1950s, the famous Urey Miller experiment, they put a bunch of chemicals in a flask, zapped it with lightning. They created amino acids. Cool. Yeah, we created life. No, you created a bunch of amino acids, an equal amount of the left and right-handed forms. They didn't create life, okay? They cheat. They'll put a bunch of stuff into a beaker. They get a bunch of garbage out the other end. In that garbage is the thing that they're looking for. So what do they say? Oh, look, we created it. They go to Sigma Aldrich and they buy that substance purified and they continue their experiment. If you look at any scientific experiment in the origin of life world, the amount of human intervention is outstanding. They've never been able to create anything without human intervention, which is the way prebiotic Earth did it. So what are our conclusions? Okay. Number one, we always look for inference to the best explanation. When you have multiple competing hypotheses, you say, what makes the most sense, keeping in mind Occam's razor? Follow the evidence wherever it leads. What makes the most sense? Okay. Max Planck, one of the world's most famous physicists, said there can never be any real opposition between religion and science, for one is the complement of the other. The psalmist wrote this: the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Skipping on down, their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Paul wrote in Colossians, for by him, by Christ, all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Christ and for Christ. And here's the key. In Christ, all things hold together. All of that fine tuning of the universe, what's holding that together? If Christ took his hands off the universe, it would spiral into decay. It would fall apart. Okay? God counts the stars. He gives names to each one of them. Okay? In the face of all of that scientific information, why is faith rejected? Okay? The data seems overwhelming, especially when you look at the explanations that are given for non-theistic explanations. Well, one reason is pride. You know, in the scientific world, there's a lot of pride and there's a lot of money. You don't get tenure if you don't publish. A recent study found that depending on the field of science, up to 89% of the research studies are faulty and can't be reproduced because they fudge the data. Okay? But there's also pride in another way, the pride of humanity. Richard Dawkins, the most famous living atheist, said it's absolutely safe to say that if you see someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person's either stupid, ignorant, or insane. You ever notice how if people don't have a good argument, they resort to calling names? Or they start yelling and screaming and shouting? If you've got a good argument, you don't need to go to ad hominem attacks. Just as Joe Friday in Hawaii Five-0 used to say, just the facts, man. Just the facts. Talk about pride. Thomas Nagel's a famous philosopher at NYU. He said, it isn't just that I don't believe in God and I hope that I'm right. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Why do these people chafe at this? Because if there is a God, what does it mean? It means we're accountable to him for our actions. People don't want to be accountable for their actions. They want their own truth, their own morality. That's why, okay? Paul wrote about this. He said, professing to be wise, people became fools. They exchanged the image of God for image of birds and creatures. They worshiped the creature rather than the creator. And 3 times in that passage, Paul says God gave them over. He gave their minds over to what they wanted. Friends, if you reject God long enough and hard enough, if you kick at him long enough and hard enough, he's going to give you what you want. Nobody has ever been brought to the cross kicking and screaming against their will. If you reject God, he's going to say, okay, you're on your own. He will give you over to what you want. Okay. A second reason is Satan, obviously. Okay. What did Satan do in the garden to Eve? Did he say, oh, God's such a mean ogre. How is he doing that to you? No, he said, did God really say that? He introduced that little element of doubt. When our kids go to college, what do the professors do? They introduce that element of doubt by feeding them half-truths. So Satan is very, very tricky. Okay. Another reason that people don't buy this is we don't have grounding in scripture. You don't stand for something, you can fall for anything. Okay. Also, we have a lack of knowledge of the world. The reason I just presented you with all of this information is most of what I shared with you, I can probably assume most of you have not heard in any shape or form. And yet everything that I shared with you is in the atheistic science literature. It's not stuff that I made up. I'm not cherry picking data. I just gave you the tip of the iceberg of what's out there, okay? There is hope, friends. Scientists are returning to God. Remember I mentioned Fred Hubble? He was the one who said that it was anathema for him to believe in the Big Bang Theory. Towards the end of his life, he never became a Christian, but he did say it suggests that a super intellect monkeyed with physics. And if you look at the numbers, they are so overwhelming as to put the conclusion of a creator beyond question. Gunter Beckley, an avid neo-Darwinist, famous paleontologist in Germany. actually started reading intelligent design literature. He became so convinced he became a Christian. He's now an anti-Darwinist. Okay. What about others? Okay. Francis Collins. He was a physician who headed the Human Genome Project. He was an avid atheist. As he went through the Human Genome Project, he became so overwhelmed by the beauty of DNA and the complexity of the information. He's now a born-again Christian working with BioLogos in California. Okay. One more, Alan Sandage, the late Alan Sandage, famous astronomer. He was a secular Jew. He became so overwhelmed, he said, it's quite improbable that such order came out of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but he is the explanation for the miracle of existence, why there is something rather than nothing. So here are our conclusions. Science and faith, friends, are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are interdependent, and science points to God, not away from him. But we have to be aware of the fact that science and faith address two different categorical questions. It is not having to choose one over the other. It's not, is the water boiling because of the kinetic energy, or is it because I want a cup of tea? It's either or and both, okay? Wrapping up, what are our practical applications? Number one, we have to understand that believers today have a different worldview. I'm 64 years old. I'll be 65 in November. Growing up, most of the world, at least the Western world, had a theistic worldview. That is no longer the case. Okay. We have to understand that the people that we're talking to may not share our theistic worldview. So we have to meet them where they are. Okay. Paul said that I became all things to all men. To the Jews, I became a Jew. To the Greek, I became a Greek. To the weak, I became weak, so that I might win the more. Paul met people where they were, where their worldview was, so he could lead them to Christ. He didn't try to impose his worldview on them right from the get-go, okay? Secondly, we need to become familiar with the basics of scientific evidence, okay? I just shared with you some of that, but there's some phenomenal books. Comprehensive Guide to Science and Faith, brand new book. I love this book. Each chapter is 10 to 11 pages long and very easy to read. Great book. This one I'm in the process of reading, Darwin's Doubt, by a philosopher of science, Stephen Meyer from the Discovery Institute. Great, great book. David Berlinski's The Deniable Darwin. This is a very, very short book by mathematician John Lennox. Can science explain everything? And he talks about the categorical differences. There's really some good information out there. Some great YouTube resources. I love this one right here. Long story short, these are like 10 to 15-minute videos that talk about origin of life in very easy to understand layman's terms. Okay. Also videos by Stephen Meyer, Hugh Ross, who's an astrophysicist. James Tour is one of the top synthetic organic chemists in the world, a Messianic Jew. There's some really, really good information out there. Websites, the Discovery Institute, Reasons to Believe, and then books like I just showed you, okay? We need to encourage our kids to pursue STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, okay? We as Christians have abdicated the world of science to atheists. Why? Faith gave rise to science. We need to reclaim that back. We can't be afraid of entering the science world. We need to boldly go where God has gone before. Okay? That's where we need to go. We need to not shy away. We need to go headstrong into it because we have the data, folks. We've got it on our side. Okay? And finally, we need to become grounded in the word. Jeremiah wrote, Jeremiah 15:16, I found thy words and I ate them. And thy words became for me the joy and the delight of my heart. Do you feel that way about God's word? That you eat them and it becomes the joy and the delight of your heart? Writing in Revelation chapter 3, Jesus wrote to John, and he was addressing the church at Laodicea. And Jesus said to the church at Laodicea, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot, but because you are lukewarm, I'm going to what? Spit you out of my mouth. Folks, we can't be tepid Christians. Can you imagine standing before God and him saying, because you were lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth? What a horrifying thought that is. But that's what he's telling us. You're either for me or you're against me. Okay? Jude, the half-brother of Jesus, in Jude verse 3. He said, I entreat you to contend earnestly for the faith. But if you're not grounded in the word, how can you contend? You're all familiar with the gospel armor, right? Breastplate of righteousness, the shield of salvation. What's the only offensive word in the gospel armor? The Bible. That's it. That's the only offensive weapon in the armor of God. If you don't know that and you don't know how to wield it, it's going to be a rough haul for you and for your kids. Let's pray.